Hi, my friends. I hope wherever you are, you're staying healthy, you are as happy as you can be, and I'm wishing you all the power um, for going through what we are all going through these days, my friends. Okay, so I left our story with remember we talked about Mycenae and the spread of Mycenaean civilization and culture and what they had gotten from the Cretians and Minoans, right? And this was, remember, now you are really getting to know the ancient world, my friends, yeah, and you're getting to see how complicated, right, the political structures that had developed up to now had gotten, right. So I want you to pause on this map, right? And remember that, your 14th century, you have your Mycenaean Greece, right? These are Arzava, are like the Hittite and Indo-European population. You have the new kingdom of Egypt, of course, expansionist kingdom, right? You have the Mitanni, right? Another Indo-European population that have come and are budding, yeah, with the Hittites and the sort of Kassites, right? You remember your Kassites? This is a culture we don't know we haven't deciphered their script. We don't know where to which population they belong, and so on and so forth. And you remember your Assyria, right? You remember your Assyria, and we haven't talked about this part of the world yet. We will be going east after we discuss the Greeks, which is the story of this session, right? I want you to just remember this. These are the Elamites, right? Elamian culture was sort of contemporaneous with the Babylonians, right? Say 3300 onwards, and then further east, we're going to be dealing with yet another cultural tradition, and non-Indo-European of Iran, right? So these are before the Indo-Europeans. The Elamites are there before the Indo-Europeans come. Yeah, my friends. So this was the story, right? The major political structures, right, in touch with each other, and so on and so forth, trading with each other and trading with Eastern Asia, right, and Southeast Asia, meaning the Chinese and the Indians, of course, the Chinese through the Indians, right? So this was the story, and all of a sudden, right at the beginning of Iron Age, right, late Bronze Age, beginning of Iron Age, circa 1200s. Remember, we had the Sea People invasions, right? That they destroyed Troy, they destroyed the Mycenaean civilization, they destroyed Mycenae itself, Kenosis, right? They affect Eastern Mediterranean, right? Both sort of northeastern Mediterranean, right, and southeastern Mediterranean. They come and they invade the Nile Delta. In other words, circa 1200, right, and of course the Mycenaeans and the Greeks, right, circa 1200, right, this world is going through an upheaval, right? It's going through an upheaval. And this upheaval is nowhere better sort of felt. In fact, one of the main centers that it was felt, right, was on the Greek peninsula, and Ionia, and we will see how that happened. So we are post, right? We are now entering the sort of quote unquote dark ages, right? That was ushered by the sea people, affecting specifically, because there's sea people and Mycenaeans or sea people, right? Affecting specifically, right, Greece and Mycenae, and that corner of the Mediterranean Sea, right? Now, I just want you to note that around circa 1100, right, in the east, right, here, right, in the east, in Iran, yeah, you have the Indo-Iranian, well, in this case, the Iranian populations migrating to the Iranian plateau. And we're going to be talking about this. This is going to be another section. But what I want you to remember is that it was in their connection with the Persians, basically, right? That it was after the connection with the Persians, after the wars of the Persians, right? That you see that Greece's classical period actually begins, right? Because after the invasion, after the Sea People's invasion, the Greek world enters a dark age, right? The dark ages of that world, right? The dark ages goes from 1150 to 800, right? 1150 to 800, my friends, already takes us to the first millennium, i.e. the dark ages coincides with the coming of the Iranians to Iranian plateau, right? And it is around 800 BCE, right, that Greeks begin to contact again with Eastern Mediterranean and the cultural traditions that had been accumulated, right, in Western Asia. The Greeks come into contact with that, right? But I want you to pay attention to something. So from 800 BCE to 480 BCE, right, is Greece's Archaic Period, right? Greece's Archaic Period. This is the time when you're talking about tribal Greeks coming and sort of beginning to form their institutions and so on and so forth. So this takes, yeah, the Archaic Period takes almost 300 years, right? 300 years. And after the Archaic Period, after this encounter with the Persians, right, and Eastern Mediterranean, Greeks enters its classical period, right? Now, the reason that I'm talking to you about this is that, the prior to this sort of revisionist historiography that has been, emphasizing the fact that, okay, Western civilization does not start with the Greeks, right? Prior to this, well, Western civilization went back only to the Greeks, right? So somehow, yeah, what we call, and it's not clear what exactly that is, right? This Western civilization, right? Somehow the ancestor of this civilization, right, used to be the Greeks, right? It was only later on, right, in the 19th century that we realized, no. The ancient world had a long history, at least 2 millennia of history, right? In the historical period, right, before the Greeks even, I mean, 2 millennia and a half, right, before the Greeks finally, become a population and self-identify as Greeks, right? Up to now, yeah, our world histories, our Western civ histories, right, and still to this day, they emphasize the Greek contribution to the Western civilization. Right now, we have had 5 modules or 4 modules. Right, we have 8 weeks of talking about all the other cultural traditions that came before the Greeks. Right. And, um, and I want you to know this context, right? The context within which the classical Greek civilization, right, develops. Now, okay, so now I usually give you a lot at the very beginning, yeah, my friends, so that when we go through the rest of the slides, I have already told you half of the story, but I want you to pay attention again, right? So 800 BCE to 480, right? 480 BCE is when Greece's classical period starts. Now, this archaic period, it's self-divided, right? It's self-divided to a number of segments where substantive issues happened in this archaic period. One of these issues was the Greeks, the era of colonization within the archaic period, right? So while the Persians are doing what they're doing, and we're going to see what they're doing, right? The Greeks are colonizing the Ionian islands. Remember, Western Anatolia, Western Turkey, right? So they are colonizing. Yeah, the Greeks are going. They are a sea people, right? The first place that they want to go to, because all the major civilizations are around. Are there now, right? It's circa. It's we will see we saw what the international scene looks like. So Greeks are going and colonizing, especially Western Anatolia, right? And in the Archaic period also begins a major institution of the Greek world, right? And that's the emergence of a peasant class of uh, of armed forces, right, who would go on armed conflicts in Greek ships, which we will get to, right, and do their fighting in a short period of time, right, and then go back home and begin to do their farming, right. So in other words, you have a population, right, a peasant population already, right, that is forced to, by by virtue of its topography that we will see, it is this population is forced to also enter, a farming population that also enters on some level in the political arena, right, of the Greeks, right, because they became the armed forces, right, that come into conflict, as we will see later on, with different populations, right. So this is a very important happening, circa 700, right, and then Yeah. After that, we begin to get the era of tyrants, right? The era of tyrants, within which the two significant figures come and introduce reforms, right? One is Solon and the other one is Pisistratus, right? And his sons who become the tyrants of the age, right? Um, and 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 then we get to 500 CE, and we will see that already the Greeks have had to deal with the Iranians during their period of tyranny. And we will see that while Greeks was going through its period of tyranny, what happens in Iran, which is a major force that comes up, and we will talk about it later, as I said. Okay, so and then there is the Ionian rebellion against Persia, and we will see the context of that, right? And the Greeks and the Persians fight, right? Yeah, you have the Marathon expedition here, right? Greece is invaded at least twice, once by Darius and once by Xerxes, the Iranians. Yeah, ultimately the Greeks are able to push back the Persians, right? And we will go through all of that story. Well, some of that story at least in this section, my friends. Okay, so so let's go back again now. So so we you saw that 1100 um the Sea People's invasion, Greece begins its dark ages, right? But I want you to remember, right? Is going through dark ages, right? And this dark ages sort of end by 800, right? In Greece, but a lot is happening in this area already. Also during the dark ages of the Greeks, right? So we remember that the Assyrian Empire that had developed, right, from 2000 BCE and until like in 1100, 1200, what, yeah, the Assyrian Empire, right, expands actually, right, during this period, right, and comes and takes over, right, all of Mesopotamia, parts of Iran. You see this, parts of Iran, Assyrian Empire, right, and takes over Egypt, Kingdom of Egypt, right. Now, something happens during this period, during the 900s, 800s, right, in this part of the world as a result of the Assyrian expansion, right? And the fact that Assyrians, more than any other people, right, try to relocate populations within their empire, right? Relocate populations within their empire. And that is when, right? That is when they also sort of attacked the kingdoms of Israel and Judea, which were beginning to grow circa 900. Right? I mean, two little entities, but entities that will become very consequential, and we'll talk about it when we deal with religion. Which I'm getting late to get to in a little bit, but we'll get to that. Okay, so this period also sees a very important, I'm sorry, a very important sort of event taking place in Eastern Mediterranean, and that's the the forced exile of the Assyrians, of the Israelites, and then of the Babylonians, right? Babylonian kingdom of the Judeans. So the two exiles, Israeli exiles, right, take place during this period of 900 to 600, where the Assyrians are have created this Neo-Assyrian Empire, right? The light green that you see on your screen, my friends, right? So okay, so now we will okay. Just bear with me, and everything will fit into its place. Yeah. So okay. So now when you talk about Assyrians, right? You sort of need to talk about the Iranians already, right? You need to talk about the Iranians already. Um, I want you to pay attention, right, to the fact that, this is circa 800, right? At least this part of the world, right, is circa 800. All of these kingdoms that you see that have developed post, post Hittite, post uh, sea invasions, right? All of these kingdoms that you see that developed here are Indo-Europeans, right? Indo-European kingdoms, just like the Hittites were, right? There is the Lydians, which are important. We should remember them. There are the Phrygians, there are the Cimmerians, right? There is the kingdom of Urartu that has taken place in what is now Armenia, right? And the Scythians are another Iranian population that are appearing around or have settled already around 800, 1,000 already, right? BCE in the Caucasus, right? So, but you need to talk about the Iranians when you talk about the Assyrians, because the people who came and basically destroyed the power of the Assyrians, right, were the Iranians, were a group of Iranians, and we will talk about them a lot later on, but there were a group of Iranians which are coming, post in Iranian settlement around 1100s. I'm sorry, 1100 in on the plateau, Iranian plateau. Iran is a plateau because it is, when we get to the topography of it, I will explain it for you. It is above sea level. It's high enough above sea level that it is called a plateau, right? You have to go through the Zagros Mountains, climb the Zagros Mountains in order to get to the Zagros Mountains here, right? In order to get to Iran, right? So now in this part of the world, right, we know that this is northeastern Iran, right? The Iranians having separated from the Indians circa 1100, 1200, maybe even earlier, yeah, somewhere between 1500. Okay, this is not working. Okay, right, somewhere between 1500 and 1100, right, these migrations begin into Iran, right, into northeastern Iran. One of the two groups of population, right, Iranian tribes, right. One of them is called Parsa, right, and the other one is called Medes, the Medes, right? They come and settle circa 1000 already on the plateau. What I want you to remember is that the history of the culture and civilization, pre-Iranian culture and civilization of the Iranian plateau, pre-Iranian, pre-migration, right, is in fact very substantive, right? Going back to, as I told you before, to 3300 BCE. And we now believe with the excavations that they have done in this part of Iran, in southeastern Iran, we now believe that there were independent centers of civilization that grew on the Iranian plateau, side by side of the Sumerians, right? So the Sumerians themselves, right, had were already had an international context, and we know that, right? Okay, my friends. So you need to talk about the Medes. So the Medes come and they rule basically for 600. 78 says to well, for a century, right? I mean, they're there for more than that, but the height of their power is a century, right? And they achieve a complex level of political organization and whatnot, right? And they played a major role in the destruction of the Assyrian Empire in the 7th century, right? The Assyrians had come, they had done their sort of exile of the Jews, right? And then comes on the scene the Medes from Western Iran, from the east, right? And destroys the Assyrians, right? So that your picture looks something like this, right? This is your Media, right? This is your Assyria, and I want you, your world is complicated, right? Don't nag about it to me, my friends. It is, in fact, this is what you have to remember, that this world is as complicated as our own world, right? Enough with our presentist sort of pretensions, right, my friends? And enough with the pretensions of Western civilization, to which, if you notice, right, Donald Trump, right, is constantly referring, right? Save our Western civilization. Yeah. And the question is from whom, right? And what is this nature of this Western civilization that he concocts in his mind? But anyway, but one other thing that I want you to remember, right? Remember the first Semitic populations to come and settle around Babylonia, right, were our Akkadians, right? Akkadians. Then came our Amorites, remember? Our Amorites and the Code of Hammurabi, right? Now, another population, Semitic population, came, and these were the Chaldeans, right? And they took over part of a kingdom of Assyria. Media took over part of Assyria, and the Chaldeans, right, sort of ruled this area for about 100 years, right? And 100 years, circa 600 to 500 or something like that, right? Okay, so this was what the map looked like, yeah, right? Here is your centers of Iranian civilization, right? And we haven't gotten into this. This Susa and Elam, right? And you see the Medes, right? And you see the Persians, right? These are the two migrations of the Iranians, right? Specifically Iranians, not the native inhabitants of the plateau who created this culture and this culture and the Susa culture and the Elamite culture, right? Not that. Okay, so this is the way your map looks like, and then, right, and then comes the Empire of the Medes, right, the Iranian Empire of the Medes that has shrunk, right, this area, right, from, they don't take over, they take over a good section of Anatolia and a good part of the Assyrian kingdom. And in fact, it is they who destroy the Assyrians. Assyrians are out of the picture by 671, already by 678, right? The Medes are expanding their empire, right? So now remember, we talked about the um, Assyrian exile of the population, right? So the Assyrians, right, come and take Israel into captivity, right? And where do they go? Look at this, my friends. This is where the exile starts, right? They go sort of northern Mesopotamia, right? Northern Mesopotamia, towards Armenia, in fact. They go to Assyria and Nineveh, right? And they go into Iran, right? They're already in Iran, right? The Israelis are already in Iran, and this is circa 800 or something, 750, 800 BCE or something, right? When we get to it, we'll know the exact dates, yeah. And then the Chaldeans who have established this Babylonian empire, right? Yeah, they also attack. In this case, they attack Judea, right? They attack Judea, and the lines that you see, the green lines that you see, is where the Judeans were settled during the Babylonian exile. So they were settled quite a bit in Babylon, right? Which was the center of the empire, right? Any empire that had any pretensions to anything, right? In this case, Babylonian Empire, i.e., of the Chaldeans, right? But you see the arrows. They already come also into Iran, right? In southern Caspian Sea, northeastern Iran, in Susa, right? In Ekbatana, we'll come to see what these cities signify, right, later on. But meaning that after Babylon, the exile, the second most ancient land of the Israelites and the Jews in exile was actually Iran, right? The second most ancient, well, the third, let's say, yeah, besides Israel and Judea, and then there's Babylonia, and then the third most ancient, right? Yeah, is the settlement of Jews in Iran, right? So all this things you hear about the Islamic Republic of Iran and its relationships with Israel and its role in Western Asia to this day, right? You have to remember this very, very ancient culture and the very, very, very ancient connections, right, that the two peoples have had for close to 3 millennia, right? Yeah, 1000 BCE, right, to 22 in the CE, right? so all this is this ancient. I'm sorry. This is 1,000 CE BCE to 2020 CE, right, my friends? Okay, so so this is the way things looked like, right? The Assyrians during the Assyrian Empire, right? They take the Jews into captivity, i.e., they want to bring it to closer to themselves and their centers of power, right? Because of the productivity of the population, and as was the habit, right, of all the great empires, but specifically the Assyrians, right? That was one wave, and then the second wave is the Babylonians, who take the Jews into captivity circa 604 to 587 BCE. Yeah, my friends. So, and here is a depiction of Assyrians with Hebrews in captivity. Yeah? Okay, now moving on, right? Moving on again, this is your sort of height of the power of the Medians for you, right? And this is what the map, right, looks like circa 600, right, BCE, right? You have Lydia, as we will see, you already have Greeks settled in Ionia, right? Circa 600. We are still in the archaic period of Greece, right, my friends? You notice, right? And in fact, we're getting close to the tyranny segment of the Greek history, right? And you see Lydia, right? Cilicia and Babylon, and this is the Babylon of the Chaldeans, right? And the Egyptians, right? And of course the Medes, right? And I want you to see, to pay attention that the Iranians are also pushing eastwards, right? They come from here, but they are now going also eastwards, right? So okay, so then begins, right, our portion of the history that we are getting to the classical period of Greece, right? Remember, until 480, 800 until 480, right? And here, you see, this is Iranians. They're already attacking Greeks, and we're going to get to it, right? And so during the Greeks classical period, what happens? I mean, at the end of the Archaic period, Ionian Greeks rebel against Persia already, right? The Persians attack the Athenians, right? Because of the role that they have in the rebellion of the Ionian Greeks, yeah, and then starts classical period of Greece after many decades of encounter, and after settling in Ionian Anatolia with all the culture that it had thus far accumulated, and we will get to that, right? And then Athens, in order to deal with the Persians, comes and forms the Delian League, right? Um, and and um, and then there is a war that takes place after the Persian Greek wars. There is a war that takes place in Peloponnesia, right? By now you know where Peloponnesia is. Yes, in Peloponnesia, between the Spartans, you know where they are, right? And the Athenians, right? And the Greeks. And yeah, see, this war takes place for 30 years, right? And it is who develops a peace between the Spartans and the Athenians, and who has been in fact helping the Spartans, right? The kings of Persia, that they make, and they make the peace, yeah, makes Persia arbiter of Greek affairs, right? Um, and just to give you an example of where this all the intellectual sort of formative period of classical Greece intellectual life, right, begins. One of the major figures is, of course, Socrates, right, who comes and argues that your gods, right, have no power, right, and really no power, and that ethics and humanity ought to be the sort of the the holy grail by which one conducts oneself, right? And then other matters happen, and we will get to that later on, right? Because then we're getting into post Alexander. We're getting into Alexander, 300 BCE, right? We're getting into the ancestors of the Alexander, right? Who's coming from Macedonia, and we're going to talk about that, right? Okay. So the Greeks come, then then Alexander comes, and Alexander dies, right? And and we will see what he has created. The region that he has created is divided between his sort of generals, three of his major generals, right? And things continue in that way until the Romans come in 200 BCE, right? And they come to Western Asia, right? Specifically, and they go into Africa, right? They follow the footstep, i.e., of the Phoenicians, and we will see what is the relationship between the Greeks and Phoenicians, my friends. So here, this was the general introduction, right? And now I can go through it faster, right? So what the rise of the Greeks, right? The Greek migrations, the migrations of Indo-Europeans into Greece, right? Already also circa 1500 BCE, right? And from 800 BCE, basically, after the Mycenaeans, of course, the Mycenaeans come and go, the sea people come and go, right? And from 800 BCE, we see the rise of the Greeks, right? Now, what is the context of the rise of the Greeks? Yeah, what did the Greeks have to offer, right? Well, not much, right, in terms of resources, right? Not much in terms of resources. In fact, Greece was a very resource poor region, right? And because they were poor, right? Because their land did not have enough resources, they had to, in search of resources, right? This has been the case from Sumerians onward, right, my friend, and this has been the case until now, is the case until now, right? In search of resources, right, they go to foreign lands, right? And it is there that they find the markets, sources of raw material, and markets in abroad, right? And they come into contact, right? And they come into contact with this tremendous civilization, right? That has been sort of working its way up and towards the west. You see, east is going to west always so far, right? And okay, so they come into contact with other people and with this sort of 2 millennia strong traditions, cultural traditions, right, of the Assyrians and the Hittites having libraries, of the Sumerians having libraries, of the Akkadians having libraries, of having dictionaries, of having, all these populations, that we've been talking about with different languages. Of course, if they want to connect to themselves, to each other, they need translators. They have bilingual people. The Assyrians are already, doing logography, right? Meaning that they are systematically sort of identifying and writing down the new, the plants and whatnot that they see in their natural environment. They have already, law has already been created, right, for a long time, right? There is the religious tradition, right, of Western Asia and so on and so forth. So the Greek and of course there's Egypt, right? It becomes the granary, right, of Greece, right? And so they come into contact with this bewildering array of sciences and populations uh, and resources and whatnot. Yeah. For, as we said before, topographically, right, the land of Greece proper, right, fits into the landscape of Eastern Mediterranean in general, and it is a dry, right, dry climate, right, unlike Eastern Mediterranean, for instance, right, they didn't have the rain shadow effect also, for instance, right? But anyway, this is how the Greek peninsula and Greece looks like topographically, right, my friends? So, uh, okay, so here is your Greek peninsula, and you remember this is your Peloponnesia. Remember, these are your Ionian islands, right? Your Crete, your Rhodes, right? And so on and so forth. Your Troy, right? Your Athens, right? Your Corinth, right? Your Sparta, remember, right? So Sparta and Athens, when we're talking about the wars between Sparta and Athens and the Persian interference in them, right? This is taking place in this part of the world, right? And you remember your Greek cities and you remember your Greek regions, yeah, my friends, right? I mean, some of these are very important, you should remember, yeah. For instance, Macedonia is very important, right? This is where Alexander is coming from, Macedonia, right? Of course, Attica is very important because it housed Athens, right? Boeotia is important because it was closely connected, right? Sparta in Laconia, Messenia, you already know, Arcadia, right? The Argos, Corinth, right? Argolis, right? Thermopylae, right? Which is the site of a war, the second major war between the Iranians and the Greeks, right, my friends? So this is the world that we are dealing with, right? Again, this is the same world, right? And again, Greek city-states and settlements. What time, what period we are still in, right? We are shortly before the beginning of the Greek classical period, right? And this is the areas in which Greeks have settled up to now, right? You remember Ionia, right? And lo and behold, there is this entity here. All of the little ones that you saw have been gobbled up, right, in Anatolia by this Persian Empire, right? Which we will get to, right? But okay, so again, Mycenae, right? Sparta, Messina, right? Thebes, Athens, and Knossos, and Crete, and Rhodes, right? And Troy. Okay, so my friends, oops, excuse me. Moving on, right? So, in order to deal with the Persians, right, the Greeks formed the Delian League, right? When the Ionians revolt against the Persians, right, and these are the areas where revolts occurred, yeah, you see, where revolts occurred, right, yeah, and and you see that um, Athens forms a league that includes the Thebans, includes all these islands, right? And of course, in helping, right, and the population here, the Greek population here, right, in order um, to support the Greek rebellion here and push against the Persians, right? Okay, so we talked about the Greek migrations, right? We talked about the fact that they brought their language, right, to get to the to Western Asia, right? We talk about culture, right? I guess we're talking about the Mycenaean culture, right? That they're bringing to the area, right? It was these encounters, chief amongst them, my friends, chief amongst them, their encounter with the Persians, right? That led to the formation of a Greek identity, right? Of the Hellas, right? Of as they call themselves, right? Um, so they go into these unknown lands, right? And they see that populations, right, and cultural centers are already dealing with geography, ethnography. Well, they have their history, but it's not written really, yeah? They have an oral history, right? And of course, the Greeks also become interested in the same very subjects, right? So this is to put the achievements of the Greeks, and I'm not sort of undermining. I'm giving credit. I will be giving credit to where credit is due, right? But you have to remember this context, my friends, right? And this Greco-centric worldview, right? And later on, the Hellenistic worldview, and the emphasis that Western cultural tradition, historical tradition, puts on it in our universities to this day, where scholars such as myself have to rebuke them and show their flaws, right, of their historical reconstruction, right. One of the flaws of this historical sort of reconstruction, right, is that they attribute, right, all these the Greek interest in all these sciences to the Greeks, right, and themselves, right, whereas uh, there are, as I cannot stop emphasizing, there's 3 millennia of history before that, right? So they, yeah, and this is how originally they had migrated, right? They had come down, right? They had gone into the Peloponnesian War, peninsula. They had gone into Crete, right? And they had gone in three different waves of migration, right, to Ionia, right? One was the Dorian Greeks that came, right, and settled close to Rhodes and whatnot. The Ionian Greeks, right, with yellow, right, and then the Aeolian immigrations, right? There's three waves of immigration into Asia Minor and settlement in the Ionian coast, right, my friends? Okay, so as I told you, the Greece is part of a large ecological zone, right? And this zone is, as you can imagine, right, is bound by, in the west, right, by the Atlantic Ocean, right, ranges of the mountains of the Alps to the north, right, where all of Europe goes skiing, yeah, um, and the Syrian desert to the east, and the Sahara to the south, right? Now the lands that are in between this area, and we're going to see it on the map, they have a uniform climate, right? They experience the seasons the same way, right? And if you look at it, right, you see we are basically dealing with this part of the world, right, that where we're dealing with a uniform climate, right? This is up to the Sahara, right? Here, 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 right? This part of the world, right? Now, um, okay, this part of the world has its own, a similar topography and climate, right, my friends? So now, yeah, and here we go again, right? And you see Italy is sort of the same way as Greece, and you see a range of mountains, right, running down the spine of Italy, kicking Sicily, right? And yeah, okay, my friends. So now what happens that they have a similar climate, yeah, is the fact that in the summer a weather front stalls, right? It just stalls near the entrance of the Mediterranean here. So yeah, and it impedes Atlantic storms, Atlantic storms from coming in, right? So therefore, right, you have the hot, dry air of the Sahara, right, coming over the region, giving it, right, giving the region this sort of fantastic sort of summer weather, right, where everybody is vacationing in this part of the world, right? Now, in the winter, this flood, in the front that I told you, dissolves, right? And the storms coming, right? And the ocean storms of Atlantic coming. They bring waves, wind, and cold, right? But in general, it was relatively easy for people to migrate from one sort of ecological zone to the other without changing their means of livelihood that much, right? Okay, so and here is your Greece and Anatolia again, and you see your Greek colonization circa 500 BCE. Don't forget the Persians are still here. In fact, they are here, right there, and they go east, right? And the Greeks and the Phoenicians are here, we will see, right? And the Greeks go, there's a population increase, right? And they migrate, right, to other centers, right? And they spread, right? And they spread the culture that they have formed as a result of this connection, right, further west. Yeah, my friends, further west. And already the Phoenicians have been doing that, right, already. Yeah, but anyway, to continue, right? Um, okay, this is again our maps, right? And you see Ionian Sea, right? You see Ionian Sea, right? And Adriatic Sea to the north of it is between Greece, here being Macedonia, here being Greece. Nowadays there's Albania here, right? And between Greece and Italy, right? This is called Ionian Sea. North of it is Adriatic Sea, right? And to the west of Italy, you have the Tyrrhenian Sea, my friends, right? Okay, so so these Greeks, right, engaged in subsistence farming, right, engaged in trade, right, and and um, you know, they planted basically grain, mostly barley, right, worked in the little arable land that they had, right. They planted barley, they planted olive trees, right, and they planted wines, from which they got the wine, right, the olives, and this is the Mediterranean cuisine, my friends, which creates the Mediterranean cuisine, which is actually very, very healthy for us, right? Okay, their sheep and goats grazed in their hills, right? In northern Greece, the rainfall was greater, right? Therefore, more cattle and horses, and so on, right? The Greeks had very small metal deposits, very little timber, right? They had some fine marble, right? And they had clay for pottery, but they had no resources as we talked about them, right? These are the sheep grazing at one of the temples of the Greeks, devoted to the wine god, right? Dionysus, right? Dionysus, right? Temple of Silenus, right? Okay. Once again, Peloponnesus, right? Corinth, right? You're learning your geography of this part of the world, my friends. Ionian Sea, Adriatic Sea, Aegean Sea, right? Thebes and Athens, Constantinople. Oh, and look at this, one of the major rivers of Europe, the Danube, right? Yeah, runs through this part of the world as well, right? Okay. So the Greeks traded, right? They had good anchorage, right? So they imported metals, timber, grain, right? For these essential needs, right? They went to the sea, right? and they got gold and iron from Anatolia, of course, and gold from Nubia, of course, through Egypt, copper from Cyprus, tin from Western Mediterranean, and so on, and grain from Black Sea region and Egypt. So they got basically everything from, from the regions surrounding them, right? So it is during the Dark Ages, right, that this what had remained through the Dark Ages of the Mycenaean civilization, and whatnot. Um, During this Dark Ages, Greece was basically isolated from the rest of the world. And as I told you, when the Archaic Period starts, circa 800 BCE, that's when, also remember, from 750 to 550, their colonization is the period of their colonization, and they're going all over the world. I mean, all over the portions of the Mediterranean world that I showed you, and they are settling there, right? Um, okay. Um, so now, end of the Dark Ages, what and who actually pushes the Greeks out of their Dark Ages, right, during the Archaic Period, and leads to the, but the Phoenicians, right? The isolation of Greece ended around 800 BCE when Phoenician ships, right? Remember, Phoenician um, ships had already from 1200, if I'm not mistaken, right? You go back to it and we refer to it, my friends, right? Already had gone to all of North Africa, right? By 800, they had established 800 when Greece was just coming out of the Dark Ages. Already Carthage in North Africa, right? The capital of the Phoenicians, right, was connected to Eastern Mediterranean and the wealth of culture there, and then was going down the western parts of Africa and was going to the British Isles, right? Not to forget that context, right, my friends, as well, right? But they, for the first time, they came into the Aegean, right, and Phoenician ships began to come into the into the Aegean Sea, and this gave the Greek civilization an important push to bring Greece out of its archaic period. So you want to see what the world looked like, my friends, circa 800 to 500 BCE, right? And you see the Phoenician influence, Phoenician homeland, right? Phoenician influence, right? Phoenician trade. Look at this, right? Pushing Italians as well, right? And we will see that they will have a lot of problems with the Italians, right? And pushing the Greeks, and even going into the Black Sea, my friends, right? I mean, this is the Greeks. These are the Greeks, right? This is the Phoenicians, right? Okay. All right. So the major sort of catapult for the Greeks in the whole of Mediterranean, right? Whole of Mediterranean were the Phoenicians, right? So here is what it looked like circa 550 BCE, right? Remember, there is the Persian Empire here, right? Persian Empire here. Of course, they're controlling this part also. So Phoenicia is also under their control, right, during this time. But Phoenicia is already a power itself, right, from 800 to 550 BCE. So this is where Phoenician colonized, right? This is their homeland, right? And this is Greece, right? And part of Ionia, right? It is by this definition Greek, right? And here are your Greek colonies, right? Going into Italy, right? Egypt, and so on and so forth, circa 500, right? And the Persians looming above them all, right? Here. Yeah? Okay. All right. Um, but this is taking us back to the Archaic period, right? Um, where, as you see, these are the tribal areas, right? Tribal areas of Greece, right? Um, okay, so once the Phoenicians come, right, um, the Greek ships sort of begin to to ply the waters of the Mediterranean, right? Um, and what do the Phoenicians give to the Greeks? Okay, they give them the writing system, right? The Phoenicians give the Greeks the writing system. Okay, my friends, I'm going to stop here. I think this video, and then I'm going to continue with the continuation of our history of the Greeks, right? Later on, my friends. For now, I bid you good farewell and a lovely day or evening and a lovely week and months. And okay, talk to you later, my friends. Bye.